Well, Kentucky Derby 148 is almost upon us this Saturday at Churchill Downs. 20 horses will be lining up for the big event. The best way for you to play it, you know what it is. Play it through NYRA Bets. If you're not a member of NYRA Bets, head on over to NYRABets.com. Use the promo code Derby25. Will not only match the $200 of your initial deposit, we'll also give you a free $25 bet. The field for this race, it is a wide open event. If we take a look at all 20 horses lined up for this race, the favoritism will go between the 10 Zanden and the 3 Epicenter. Really depends on which of these two horses Mattress Mac bets his money on. And as of the taping of this, I have no idea, but you'll know on the board. And that'll make the other one perhaps a little bit of an overlay, and perhaps the one he bets a little bit of an underlay. Couple also eligibles on the outside. And we'll go through the field and talk about pretty much everybody, and certainly the main contenders, starting with Epicenter, who has been terrific. Epicenter winning 4 of his last 5, losing by a head in only 1 race. And what he showed in this race, the Louisiana Derby, his last start 6 weeks ago, was the ability to rate off of horses. He's been a horse that's needed to control up on the front end. Steve Asmussen used this race wisely to see if he could sit behind horses, and he passed the test with flying colors. Running a big figure at a distance, 1 mile and 3/16. They rarely run at Louisiana Downs, but seems to be a very good race. No knock on Zozos, who was just a limited campaign, 2 starts this year, 3 starts in total. 3 starts this year. He's done a lot, and he's not a bad horse. I don't particularly like him in here, drawing on the outside. Pioneer Medina finished 3rd, another improving horse for Todd Pletcher. And if you want a long shot improving for Todd Pletcher, you could probably do worse than him. But I think the conversation about this race has to center around Epicenter. The fact that Epicenter showed he can be tactical is an advantage for him. And we'll talk more about the pace in this race, because while you have to imagine Joel Rosario will look to be forward, there are potentially some other serious speeds in here. Whether or not they show up is going to go a long way to determining whether or not this is a race that can be dominated with horses forward, horses like Epicenter, horses like Messier, perhaps like Taba as well, or the pace gets hot, and that helps horses like Mo Donegal, breaks from the inside, as well as the possible favorite Zanden. Epicenter has had absolutely dream trips in all of his races, and I think that's a bit of a concern, because even though he makes his own trips and he has speed, you have to worry a little bit in the Kentucky Derby that maybe things don't go so perfectly, and that's a bit of a concern for me. Still, he's an immensely talented horse. He's trying to give Steve Asmussen his first win in the Kentucky Derby, which is pretty amazing, consider he's achieved just about everything else in this sport. Keep in mind, there's a lot of talk right now. Steve Asmussen is on, going into the taping of this show, over a 70-race losing streak in Kentucky. I wonder how random it is. That's a pretty incredible losing streak, especially for a man with as powerful a training stable. And he has some serious runners, to say the least, potentially the favorites in both the Derby and the Oaks. Let's move on to the other possible favorite, and that's Zanden, coming out of the Bluegrass, where he absolutely demolished Smile Happy. Smile Happy, a little bit wide, but really if you look at track, it's not that much wider than Zanden was. Smile Happy had a good trip in the sense that this was a race that was really pretty much compromised by, or dominated, I should say, by horses that were forwardly placed, running 2, 3, 4 in here. Zanden, on the other hand, shuffled back to last, going around the turn, took a little bit of traffic on the turn, fought his way between horses. Not saying he had a bad trip, but given the way the race was run, it was run much more favorably for Smile Happy than Zanden, and Zanden absolutely blew him off the racetrack. So not only do we think Zanden's a better horse, and I think we saw an inkling of that in the Risen Star, when Zanden, while finishing behind Smile Happy, had a much, much tougher trip. All of them left in the wake of the loose in the lead Epicenter. But Zanden has shown the ability, and this is something that's important in this race, to fight through traffic, to overcome some adversity. A tough trip in the Risen Star, near the pace outside in the Remsen, his second start, going from 6 furlongs to 1 mile and 1/8. Zanden seems to be a horse that runs well no matter what obstacles are thrown in his path, and that's something that's going to suit him well in this Kentucky Derby. But he's a very different horse than Epicenter, because he doesn't have any speed, and he's going to be at least a little bit at the mercy of the pace. So he's going to need them to be moving a little bit in front. If the pace comes hot, he becomes the horse to beat. If the pace is a little more tepid, it's going to fall much more in the lap of Epicenter and some other runners in this race. Now, as we turn to the Wood Memorial, the Aqueduct prep, the New York prep, and take a look at Mo Donegal and the absolutely brilliant ride he got from Joel Rosario to win this race, you're talking about a horse that has absolutely no speed. Zanden, I'm not going to say he's a speedball compared to Mo Donegal, but he is a faster horse than Mo Donegal. And Mo Donegal is talented. He got an absolutely terrific ride by Joel Rosario, know, and as good as Irad Ortiz is, he couldn't have ridden him any better than Joel did. There's an argument that there was at least a mild advantage to being inside the Wood Memorial, though I wouldn't make too much of that. I would say more it was a good place to be, and thus he was able to take advantage of it in running down the very talented early voting in a pretty quick Wood Memorial. Mo Donegal's good, but he's going to need pace. Much more pace dependent than Zanden is. If the pace is particularly hot in here, he's going to make a big run. For people that are worried about him drawing the rail, you're talking to the wrong guy, or maybe the right guy, because I don't think it matters at all. First of all, we have a one gate now, so it mitigates a little bit of the issue of breaking inside. The other thing is, Mo Donegal has no speed. He's going to drop back from whatever post he is. Wouldn't you prefer he's able to drop back from an inside post so you know he's going to save ground as long as he possibly can? At least I would. So I don't worry about the post. I worry more about the pace scenario. We'll take a look at the Santa Anita Derby and two horses that can and likely will be at least relatively forwardly placed in the first place finisher Taba and the second place finisher Messier. The conversation has to start with Taba. If somebody said to me, if you could somehow distill their talent into a test tube, who's the most talented, I would have no problem saying it's Taba. He has done a lot in a very short period of time, and yet another gun runner that has excelled in gun runner's amazing first crop. He wins first time at 6 furlongs at Santa Anita in 103. He comes back 5 weeks later at 1 1/8, the same kind of move that Zanden made as a 2-year-old, and runs a 102 buyer, albeit getting a perfect trip. This is a brilliantly talented horse. The only one, really, it seems, that wanted to run him in the Santa Anita Derby last time was his owner. You could say he turned out to be making the right decision. Ultimately, will it have been the right decision as his career progresses? We don't know. He's now making his third start in the 1 1/4 Derby. Unlike the Santa Anita Derby, in a 6-horse field where he was able to sort of float along third, outside of horses, not taking much kickback, not worrying about any company towards the front end, the Kentucky Derby is a much, much different race. And I have to imagine that Mike Smith riding him is going to be aggressive with him and look to see him forward. If the pace is not that hot, he may benefit from it. If it is, I expect him to wilt because he's going to be facing obstacles he's never faced before. And the history of horses like this prematurely running in a race as difficult and arduous as the Derby is not good. I hope he runs well. But if he runs well, I'm going to be wrong and I'm going to lose my money. And I hope no matter what happens, we do see more of him as the year progresses because he is an immensely talented 3-year-old colt. I prefer Messier out of the Santa Anita Derby. Messier did the dirty work that day. He attacked the favorite Forbidden Kingdom, and he put the pressure on him. Forbidden Kingdom ended up wilting. He may ultimately not be a router. And while Taba was getting the perfect trip behind him, he was doing the dirty work. Yeah, he finished 2+ lengths behind Taba. I think we'll see a different story in Kentucky. I think we'll see Taba probably more forwardly placed. And the fact that Messier, who has run big figures, albeit on a track that was very favorable to him, 2 back in the Robert Lewis, I think you'll see a horse in Messier that gets a better trip in here. Now, if the pace gets hotly contested and falls apart, even if he's sitting 3 or 4 off it, he might be too close. But I'm going to hope it's not a blistering pace, and Messier is a horse that I like a great deal in this year's Kentucky Derby. Let's go to Arkansas. A lot of years people say, oh, the Arkansas prep's the best, and there have been years where they have been. This was the polar opposite. In a lot of ways, it's arguable that the weakest preps that we saw were in Arkansas. And we'll take a look at Cyberknife, a very deserving winner of the Arkansas Derby. I don't think the filly was best despite her trip in here. I think that Cyberknife was. And I do think he's a really nice horse. And if somebody says, who's one of these Derby prep winners you're leaving out that's going to surprise you and at least get a piece, I'm not going to be surprised when it's Cyberknife. I just don't know that he's quite good enough. But in this race, Ferrant Giroux made a decisive early move as the pace was slowing down the backstretch, an aggressive move, and he continued on and got it done despite the fact the race was falling apart behind him. I don't flaw Cyberknife, a very good trainer in Brad Cox, one of his 3 entrants in here, and Cyberknife is good. I just don't know if he's good enough. Now, Barber Road's going to be a very big price, but I do think he's a horse that a lot of people are going to be using at least somewhere underneath on their tickets. And if the pace gets hot, I can understand that scenario unfolding. But I think you need to ask yourself, which one of Zanden and Mo Donegal is he going to outclose to get a piece in this race? Because they are significantly better than him. And Barber Road is kind of a neat horse, but he's gotten brilliant rides from his rider, Raylu Gutierrez, to get a piece of races that were falling apart at the end. And he was ridden perfectly to take advantage of races that were falling apart at the end. Now, maybe that happens in the Derby, but it's still hard for me to see, under the most optimal of circumstances, a good trip and a fast pace, him being any better than 4th or 5th. We'll see what plays out. The Arkansas preps this year were a cut below what we've seen in some prior years. Let's go down to Gulfstream and look at the almost white Abario beating the very green Charge It, and a horse that I'm interested in, Simplification, who drew post 13. White Abario is one of those horses that's always getting a lot of attention because, hey, he's easy to see, number one, but also he's a pretty neat-looking horse, and what's not to like? Won the Holy Bull easily, and he won the Florida Derby with a bit of a wide trip, though he got a very good trip last time out. But I don't want to knock a horse that seems to show up and run reasonably well. I just don't really trust the races down in Florida. I'm going to lose to White Abario and his trainer, Safi Joseph, winning a race like the Kentucky Derby. Now, Todd Pletcher, on the other hand, who's won 2 Derbies and has a lot more experience, has Charge It. I wonder if Charge It's a horse, despite being a Tapit, who's going to get better with more distance. I'm a little bit questionable about that, and his greenness, which continues, is a problem. Now, he has a great trainer in Todd Pletcher, and at some point he's going to get over it. And if he does, he could be a force in this division. And if it's in the Kentucky Derby, I may be wrong, and he may run well. The horse I'm using, though, is Simplification. I don't blame Jose Ortiz for being aggressive last time, but considering the way the race unfolded, being as aggressive as he was worked against Simplification. And he has shown in prior races that he can do well when he has trouble, as he did when second the Holy Bull. And the Fountain of Youth, he can rate well off horses and get it done quite easily. And that was the fastest fig he ran. I don't love these horses from Florida, but the one I'm going to use is Simplification. He's the long shot in this race that I'm going to include in my play somewhere. Let's head to Turfway Park and take a look at the runners that ran on synthetic, Tiz the Bomb and Tawny Port. Tiz the Bomb is a neat horse. How good he is, I don't know. It's not like any of his turf races, the 2-year-old, were that spectacular, despite finishing second when the pace fell apart in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. But ultimately, I think his future probably lies in the grass. I can't blame them for taking a shot in a race like the Kentucky Derby, but if he wins a race on the dirt at 1.25 miles, I should be ripping up my tickets and a little extra money just as punishment. The horse who finished second to him, Tawny Port, showed he can handle the dirt, and he ran reasonably well in sandwich dirt efforts, getting 86 and 89 buyers for trainer Brad Cox. He's just not fast enough to be effective in this Kentucky Derby unless a lot of things change and a lot of things happen. Let's talk about, oddly, a prep race that might turn out to be one of the keys to this Kentucky Derby, and that is the UAE Derby at Meydan. The winner of the race, Crown Pride, probably take a little too much money because these are Japanese horses, and the Japanese horses have done so well. We saw them in the Breeders' Cup, and we saw them over in Dubai do well in some of those races. The problem is he's not as good as those horses, and he definitely hasn't shown himself to be as good as these horses. And in general, the UAE Derby is a subpar field, a lot of money for lesser horses, but it gets at least 1 or 2 horses into the Derby, and in this year, 2. I don't believe that Crown Pride is good enough, and if he wins, I will lose. As, of course, is the case with Summers Tomorrow. But Summers Tomorrow, who finished second, is a very important member of this field because he has very, very quick blistering sprint speed. And while Classic Causeway, who we'll touch on in a second, is another potential speed in this race, he's actually faster. And if he breaks quickly and he guns to the front and you see him leading in the first 1/4 mile or 3/8, there's a very good chance they're going too fast up front, and that might take a toll on the likes of Epicenter, Messier, and Taiba, and do very well for the closers like Zanden and Mo Donegal. But sometimes these horses have some trouble out of the gate. They don't show up. Tougher horses, tougher riders, different scenario. Joel Rosario breaking right next to him. And it doesn't work out as it could, and it has in other races. And if he isn't engaged in the pace, then the pace figures to be a little bit more tepid, and the race will play more towards the front runners. As far as Classic Causeway, no question he should be forwardly ridden to have any chance in this race. Now, he has no chance regardless of where they place him here, and there is part of me that wonders, with Julian Leparoux named to ride, if they're not going to be super aggressive with him, a horse that isn't good enough to win this race but has the potential to be effective in races like the Woody Stevens 5 weeks from this weekend on the Belmont Stakes weekend. I am going to hope that the pace isn't particularly strong for my selection. My selection is Messier. I feel as though he has the potential to be as good as the likes of Zanden and Epicenter, or nearly as good. He's coming out of a race where he ran better than it looks, and I think his price will be 2 to 3 times the price of those other horses. So to me, he could be value. My long shot play, I put him second, Simplification. I have a great respect for Zanden, who in a lot of ways may be the horse to beat. I put he and Epicenter third and fourth. But I'm going to try to get Messier home for trainer Tim Yakteen, who is saddling his first Derby starters, taking over for the suspended Bob Baffert with Taba and Messier. Messier for me in an interesting Kentucky Derby, a race that I know you'll be betting at NYRABETS. If you're not a member, head on over to NYRABETS.com. Use the promo code DERBY25. We will give you a $25 free Derby bet as well as a $200 sign-up bonus.